I heard your band had sold all their guitars and bought synthesizers. I heard you sold all your synthesizers and bought guitars. You want to make something real.
Testing, testing, testing.
There are parts of our hobby that can be solitary.
This is a very old microphone. Testing.
You want to make a Yaz record.
You want to make friends better friends.
Okay.
You want to raise toasts. You want to remind each other, man, I love it when we hang out together.
And away we go. My name is Jack Edward, and this is session 0 of this channel and this podcast. This feed is going to fill up with all sorts of work, but in case it's early on or whatever, you just want to go back digging, figure out what I'm all about. I want to lay out who I am and what I'm trying to do here. So I'm going to be uploading some videos and audio and say what the channel is for. Some podcasts, some audio strictly only stuff, and some video. If you've found me, you probably take an interest in role-playing games of some kind. Usually the ones I'm concerned with are tabletop games, pen and paper games, Dungeons and Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, stuff like that. You ever heard of that? Then you're the audience. Maybe you do like table crafts, or maybe you do like improv, or maybe you're just trying to get your people together and like play more games. That's what you're into. And at a certain point for you, it probably became more than just kind of a little bit of fun, right? It became, tabletop role-playing games became a little more than a passing interest or hobby. You got passionate. It became your art or something like that, right? It became your personal form of creative expression. Or it just became something that got you curious and like lit your fire and made you think about new things and in new ways, right? You had a vision of what all this meant to you that wasn't just like, quote, a game. Even if you can't quite name it or put your finger on it, right? That unidentified space is kind of what I like to explore and get into. That space in which we're like learning to improvise well. Because personally, I'm feeling like I'm in a kind of an in-between time. You ever feel like that? I feel like I'm leaving a lot of old stuff behind in this pursuit, in this hobby, in these games of mine. Some things that served me well over the past few years, right? But now I'm growing. I'm trying new things. I'm meeting new people. And there's another chapter coming. Something's coming, and I'm not sure what that thing is, but it's on the horizon. Do you ever feel like that? Like you're closing a chapter, and you're starting to go, what's that on the next page? I'm excited. I'm anticipating. Maybe you're feeling that right now. I think a lot of people in the gaming space are feeling that right now. Like there's a lot there, like there's a new territory that's all going to open up in front of us. It's exciting, right? So who am I? My name's Jack Edward. I live in New York City, specifically Brooklyn. It's where I live now. I was born in New York City. I was mostly raised here my whole life. I can't really get far away from the city. So this is my neighborhood on a rainy evening in fall. I live near Prospect Park, sort of like Central Park's wilder Brooklyn cousin, and developed by the same guys actually, the Olmsted brothers in the 1800s. And today the neighborhoods around Prospect Park are this incredible mix of different kinds of people, all kinds of people. From Park Slope to Crown Heights, Little Caribbean, and it's a neighborhood that's also changing a lot. Whatever you think, by the way, of New York, whatever it is, it's fine. Your history, whether you know it from shows or media, or maybe you've been here, or maybe you live here. Maybe you're listening to this because you know me. It's also a city where a lot of games are happening, and a lot more than there used to be, right? Somewhere within walking distance of me right now, this moment, people are playing role-playing games. There are D&D actual play streamers who are like New York City based. That's their thing. And these people are not who you might expect as your typical gamer, right? Because when I was growing up, tabletop role-playing games like D&D were mostly played by a very predictable sort of people. At least that's what was legible to me, right? Let's talk about that. When I was young white guy in the New York metropolitan area, I didn't have a lot of friends, and my parents didn't have a lot of money. So I won't get into the whole origin story. It's boring. How did you first discover D&D? But the fact of the matter is, at some point, a player's handbook fell into my hands, right? And I fell in love. I read it cover to cover until the cover fell off, right? I read this book, and what was this game? I'd never seen it played. I'd never experienced anything like it. A lot of the earliest stuff I was exposed to was like third edition Dungeons & Dragons illustrations. I'm like, whoa, I want to play as these characters. I want to run these games, right? I want to go on these, have these amazing stories. What could this be like? And eventually later on, I got some friends in middle and high school, and I started running games. That's a story for another day. But suffice it to say, one thing I had as an experience is I grew up in game shops, a lot of game shops in the tri-state area. Some places that are still around, old shops with sagging shelves, and guys have been working there for, like, at least since I was 11, right? 9 maybe years old.
I don't know.
Some of the shops around New York, and there are a lot of shops, look like giant old libraries like this one, just full of like RPGs from days long past. Some of them, especially like the board game cafes or the more small town variety out in Brooklyn, have these like thriving scenes full of young people. Honestly, I like visiting all of them, but it sort of like depends on my mood or my needs, and they all have this like very different flavor. But in a lot of them, you can see like people playing things like Catan or whatever, just over from a table, playing like Dungeon Crawl Classics or D&D 5e or whatever. And it's important to me. It gave me this experience. Now, these places weren't very inclusive all the time. That's for sure. I think that's one thing we don't like about looking back on that history, is that a lot of those spaces were for a certain type of person, and not everybody else felt comfortable or very welcome there. I don't love that looking back. I don't know that as a 12-year-old boy I was helping necessarily, right? But it's important to me to have that exposure, because D&D is something that I personally learned. I'm one of those people who, you know, from back in the day, right? Who, I'm in my mid-30s now. I learned D&D not just because I was some kind of like nerdy kid, but also in tension with that as a socially transmitted tradition, right? I got into D&D, my first games, because in the back of this store, some of the older guys are running this game, and man, this week they're going to let me sit in, and oh my gosh, I didn't even think they liked me, but I just wanted to be at the table with those guys. And so for me, it was this thing I got transmitted to me from older people in physical space. A very interesting way to receive the folk tradition of Dungeons & Dragons. And the way the game is transmitted generationally is important to me. The fact that it can bring people together across different, cultures and groups, sure, but also ages, right? Intergenerational space. So fast forward to today. I run a lot of games. I've been playing since those days. I organize people. I ran a lot of D&D 5e, Call of Cthulhu, some OSR stuff, some story game stuff, some world building stuff. Those games are really tight. I could talk about those. But lately I've been branching further and further out. And that branching means learning a lot of new skills and examining how I create spaces and how I facilitate experiences and how I organize my time and how I prepare and how I collaboratively world build. all sorts of stuff like that. Now, one thing I want to bring up, this is kind of tangential a little bit, but bear with me. I'm somebody with a strong, faith-based identity. I don't say that to be clear because religion is something I'm going to be, proselytizing or talking about much on this channel, but I say that because it informs my perspective in a lot of ways as someone who organizes D&D games that I also organize in, progressive faith spaces for a lot of reasons. One, for example, I think a lot of people these days talk about, especially very secular folks who discover this stuff. There's been a lot of comparison between tabletop role-playing game sessions and forms of, religious ritual. And some of that stuff can get kind of funny. But I'll tell you what, if you don't think that organizing a group together for a RPG session is like organizing a group together for an evening prayer or a series of study sessions on a religious text, I got bad news. There are a lot of similarities there. Lots of the same organizing skills at work. And also a lot of the same weird problems come up, right? Mismatched expectations. People feeling unexpectedly hurt about stuff. Unexpected stuff. Intense topics come up. We get activated. And we got to make the space safe. We got to find comfort and community with people who bring very different expectations and experiences to the table. And again, you hear a lot of folks talk about D&D as a folk tradition, something that's yes, you can see it calcified in media, or you can see it in a text on the page on your shelf. But, D&D is really something that it comes to life in practice. Something that is sometimes only transmitted and learned through doing, often not by the words on the page, but through group behavior and inherited tradition, for better and for worse. Yeah, a couple things in common there with communal spiritual life. Again, I want to be clear. I don't think actually discussing experiences of organizing in faith community is something I really want to get into, ever. But I just want to tell you guys, I want to be clear up front and transparent about where I get my respect and reverence for people's time and presence and participation and the need to create safe and brave spaces of belonging. God knows I am not trying to convince or convert anyone to or of anything. I could not give less of a fuck about that. But I do want to mention it because that's a big part of who I am. Let's get to what I actually want to do with the channel, right? I want to talk about what I'm learning about running role-playing games these days. What I'm interested in is how to create better experiences at the table, explore new games, meet new people. Some of it will be very conventional. So I've got a few silly tutorials I'll put on YouTube, just stuff I've learned, right? Some top-down reviews or look at a book I've been running or I'm gonna run. I've got a tutorial on paper minis I'm going to upload. I'm winding down my Rime of the Frost Maiden campaign. I'll do a post-mortem on that. I'll do a tutorial on how to soundtrack your games because I've got a lot of this is I've got strong opinions. I'm going to warn you on that right up front. But I want to do stuff that's a little bit wilder than the conventional stuff that I'll upload to YouTube. Stuff that I don't see in the discussion already. I'm really concerned about stuff like how games make community and how we can make communities and game cultures that aren't centered mainly around online spaces or particular retail interests or publishers, right? How to create game communities where you can introduce new kinds of play and develop strong and experimental play cultures, so you can play more games and more kinds of games and do cool shit. I have advice, actually, in terms of literally best practices for actually scheduling and running and finding players for a lot of games and putting them on the calendar, running more games more often, and what kind of skills and values you have to cultivate for that. So I'll do some of that. I want to talk about collaborative world building. There's a lot of talk about this these days. More games are working collaborative world building and shared GMing responsibility into their mechanics. And I love that idea, and I want to get into the tough stuff on that. Literally, how do we get our people together across all these different experiences and stretch our minds to create these visual internal creative palettes together to make something bigger and more psychedelically wild and interesting than any one of us could have made on our own. And then transmit it to one another so that we can actually use that palette to write a baseline level of assumptions on which we can improvise. It's fucking crazy stuff. I might actually upload some solo gaming. I think it'd be kind of like tight to use the Ironsworn system to run like Metis Media's adventure path they wrote called City of Crescent, which is their fantasy setting in Victorian Istanbul. So a solo campaign in Victorian Istanbul. Or maybe I'd use like Trophy Loom to run something. That'd be neat. But I hope it won't just be me on this channel. There are people, I mean, I talk to all sorts of people, but there are people I'd like dream of talking to. Chris Spivey, the guy who writes a lot of like great sort of New York City inspired role-play material, including the masterful Harlem Unbound 2nd edition for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition, which is his like source book on 1920s cosmic horror adventure in Harlem. I'd love to talk to him about like what it's like to write games that encounter reality and confront history and invite us into that. I haven't talked to any of these people yet, by the way. I'd love to talk to like Sean Tompkin about the role of intuition in moving through imagined space and what the dice are an agent of there. And I want to talk to people, and this is where I want to break from what's out there, who aren't designers or performers. Like, I want to talk to my own players. I want to talk to people around me in my city, in my neighborhood, in my community, who are playing these games, who you'd never think are playing these games. In 2023, coming up on 2024, I get amazed and surprised every day who find, in my other spaces, non-gaming spaces, who find out that I play D&D, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm playing this other thing. Oh, you're running that? You didn't think I was a gamer? I'm running Root RPG and Masks, but my system's really Call of Cthulhu, and I'm like, who are all of you? I want to meet you people. I want to be among you people. Because these are, and you, if you're listening, are in a sense my people. You know what I mean by that? You know what that means? Have you ever had that longing to like find your people and be among your people and around your people? And for your people to be thriving and doing well? And for the idea of who belongs to that group of your people to get bigger and bigger and more expansive, for that umbrella to widen so that it encompasses more kinds of different people of all kinds. I think that's the kind of longing you get when you take that first longing you had, when you hold that first player's handbook. Or maybe for you listening, maybe you encountered it through a live play, like an actual play. Or you saw some people at a cafe, or you saw a board game cafe. More and more of those every day in this city. And you thought to yourself, I want to be a part of that. I think when you take that longing and cultivate it, I want to figure out what that is. These games that bring us closer to one another and ourselves. So that's what I'm going to do here. Join, subscribe here wherever here is. Write me your comment, leave a message or review, reach out, come chat. Let's go and find our people together and see what we can do. Thanks to all who listened. Theme music is Can't Be Jenny by ITMR, the instrumental version, with additional music by Feu Marinho and Avis. Recordings are taken in Brooklyn and Manhattan, with additional sound bites cribbed from Matt Colville of MCDM and Hanker Infernale of Runehammer. Stay fly. See you soon.